Typically, animal rescues are full of intense moments. Usually, rescuers are dealing with a frightened and defensive animal, and one wrong move can leave someone seriously injured. Sometimes, though, the most noteworthy moment occurs once the animal is safe and sound. When one resident of Fulshire, Texas, found a deer tied up behind a house under construction, he alerted the authorities. An officer responded, and with the deer in a panic, he helped free it from its bindings. All in a day's work, right? But it's what happened after the rescue that'll make you happy that cameras were rolling. When an animal is in danger, any number of things can go wrong for those attempting a rescue. Despite these risks, that didn't stop one resident of Fulshire, Texas, from acting when he found a deer tied to a tree behind a neighbor's house. As ABC Eyewitness News reported, the man entered the backyard of a home that was under construction as soon as he spotted the animal in trouble. He alerted the authorities, who helped cut the deer free, but that's when things took an unexpected turn. Eventually, Officer Kevin Zishang Wright arrived on the scene and began investigating for evidence as part of the follow-up process. Who would tie up this poor animal? After combing the property for a few minutes, they realized something strange. Despite being freed, body cam footage revealed he hadn't scurried into the woods as one might expect. Rather, when officers arrived, he had simply moved toward the back door. A few pieces of nylon rope were still dangling from his antlers. Officer Zishang, with his police body camera still rolling, removed the last shred of the rope from the deer's antlers. Still, the deer did not flee. In fact, he cozied up to his rescuers, even allowing the officer to give him a scratch under his chin. Of course, Officer Zishang didn't want the deer hanging around a spot where he'd just been tied up to a tree. "I was trying to spook him," he told ABC News, "to get him to run back out into the woods, and he wasn't having it. He wanted to hang out with us." As the officers made their way back to their cruisers out front, the deer followed them. Officer Zishang shouted gleefully, "He's not scared at all," as the deer stared at him from the front lawn. The deer must have really just wanted to show his gratitude. With the deer's safety in mind, the officer eventually chased him back into the woods behind the home. As much as he probably would have liked to befriend the deer, it's rarely a good idea to have a wild animal become too comfortable with humans. Still, their story wasn't over just yet. 2 days later, while speaking with ABC News, Officer Zishang was explaining how he'd never seen such a friendly deer. Then, wouldn't you know it, the reporter pointed out something in the woods. "Sir, is that him right there?" the reporter asked. Incredulous, Officer Zishang turned around and, sure enough, there was the deer watching the interview. "He came back to see me," Officer Zishang said as the deer strode over to him once more. He's a good kid. I'm going to call him Uncle Buck." Even then, the officer continued to worry for the deer's safety. What if whoever had tied him up in the first place found him? Apparently, Uncle Buck was no stranger to the community. For weeks, he'd been approaching the local children. After already giving Uncle Buck his freedom, authorities called Texas Parks and Wildlife, who determined that the deer was eligible for relocation. As of today, he's living peacefully in an animal sanctuary, far from anyone who would do him harm. It's sad to think that Uncle Buck's kindness may have been what led to his capture. Luckily, there are people like Wildlife Aid founder Simon Cowell, no, not that Simon Cowell, who share Officer Zishang's deer sympathies. It was December 2015 when an unnamed driver spotted a wounded deer lying motionless on a stretch of road flanked by dense forest. Worried, the driver phoned Wildlife Aid, and Simon himself responded to the call. One car had stopped ahead of the deer and another behind to help prevent traffic from getting too close to the frightened animal. When Simon arrived at the scene, he expected it would be another day at the office, but he couldn't have been more wrong. Simon pulled over and approached the deer, whispering to her in a soothing tone. "All right, darling," he said. "All right, sweetheart. What's the matter, hey?" Then he knelt down beside the deer and examined the damage. Clearly the victim of a speeding car, the poor deer was shaken, scared, and she sported a nasty gash above her eye. Simon silently noted that a veterinarian would need to stitch it closed. The deer pressed her snout to Simon's knee, leaving a crimson streak right on his jeans. She'd need all the help Wildlife Aid had to offer, and she needed it quickly, or else she wouldn't survive her injuries. With his bare hands and all his strength, Simon scooped up the deer into his arms and held her close to his chest like a parent might hold their frightened child. Besides her injuries, there was another reason why Simon needed to act so quickly. Deer are very nervous and don't cope well with being handled, Simon said, before adding that all wild animals can suffer from capture myopathy. That was a stress-related disease that killed muscle tissue with lactic acid buildup. With no time to waste, Simon rushed the deer to his rescue facility. Gently placing a towel over the deer's head so she wouldn't be spooked by unfamiliar surroundings, Wildlife Aid's veterinarian, Dr. Emma Yoret, set down the hurting creature on a hay-padded floor. It was time to get to work before it was too late for this deer. Right away, Dr. Yoret had good news. The deer's skull was not broken. She stitched up 3 wounds, cleaned the blood, and gave the deer a painkiller. Unfortunately, Simon and his team would face an even bigger challenge. The deer might have been all patched up, but would she be able to return to her life of frolicking and grazing? Simon brought her right back to where he'd first found her, with the hopes that, after her nerves settled down, the deer would bound straight for her family. "We just have to pray that she'll stand for us," Simon said, as he and another rescue worker brought the deer into the woods alongside the road. He pet her softly and whispered some words of encouragement. "Listen to me," he said. "It's all over." However, Simon couldn't just leave the deer in some shrubs and call it a job well done. "If she puts her head back," he said, "this is a sign she's giving up on life." So before he could leave, he anxiously waited for the deer's signal. In a heartbreaking moment, the deer's head flopped backward. That was it. She'd given up. The trauma and pain of the car crash was too much for her to fight on. Simon's rescue, it appeared, had all been for nothing. Or had it? Simon wasn't the type to give up on any animal. "Putting her head forward," he said as he tried to help the poor deer stand up, "hopefully will refocus her effort to live." But would Simon's coaxing work? The deer stumbled and staggered as Simon lifted her to her feet. It seemed like he was so determined to see this deer live, he'd have spent his own life carrying her if he needed to. "I know you're hurt, I know you're bruised," he told her, "but you can do it." Finally, after plenty of coaxing, the deer stood on 4 wobbly legs. It was heartbreaking watching her struggling to stay up, Simon said. "This is the most worrying time for us because we never know if we've done the right thing or the wrong thing. I'm just convinced that after years and years of doing this is the right thing for this deer," said Simon. "She's right on the verge of making it or collapsing." Sadly, once more, the deer collapsed. Perhaps a less stubborn rescue worker would have admitted defeat right then and there. Perhaps he or she would have brought the deer back to the facilities or left her to fate in the woods. But not Simon. Instead, he picked her up and carried her deeper into the woods. She needed more time to pull her thoughts together, Simon said. She probably had a massive headache from her collision with the car. Deeper in the woods, he guided the deer, supporting her steps. Would this be enough to get her out on her own? Finally, the deer's ears perked up. She was alert and standing on her own. The sight brought Simon to tears. "Go on, sweetheart," he called after her. "Go on, go away." You could hear the pained joy in his voice. After all that work, the deer stood a chance. For some time, Simon watched the little deer disappear into the dense woods. "It wrecked me," Simon said, his eyes wet with tears. "You never know whether you've done the right thing or the wrong thing. It's beautiful and horrible." Despite his long animal career, Simon thought perhaps nothing would affect him as deeply as the wounded deer who decided life was worth living. He knew that empathy was often difficult unless you had a personal interaction with the creature. You wouldn't call Colts Neck, New Jersey a town of animal lovers back in 2018. The town was fed up with deer. These animals popped up everywhere, and they seemed to multiply every day. It was only a matter of time until the deer invaded their homes and businesses. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it with your friends and family. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.